The games that you've worked on are very meaty projects, years long. In the case of Walden, it was 10 years, I believe. People interested in creating games probably have a lot of ideas. How would you help them kind of say no to certain things?
Wow. How to say no. That's such an interesting problem for all of us, right? First and foremost,
All right, so we just got done chatting with Tracy Fullerton, and really impressive conversation. I've thought the dedication to games that she's been building is extremely inspiring and also exhausting in some ways when I think about how long it takes to actually create something of that magnitude. Aaron, what did you take away from that conversation?
I think in some of the stories, there was this healthy contrast about when to say no and when to say yes. And on the no side, like really scoping it down. On the yes side, like especially early in your career, being very open to opportunities. So I think it's better to hear that from Tracy herself. So on to the pod.
All right. I'm Nate Cadillac, and I'm here with my co-host, Aaron Cardell. And today we are thrilled to speak with Professor Tracy Fullerton, the creator of Walden, a game. Tracy is an experimental game designer, writer, author, educator, and a director emeritus of the USC Games program. Her research center, the Game Innovation Lab, has produced several influential independent games, including Cloud, Flow, Darfur is Dying, The Night Journey, which includes the incredible artist Bill Viola, and Walden, a game, a simulation of Henry David Thoreau's experiment at Walden Pond. Walden, a game, is the video game representation of Thoreau's experiment. Follows the loose narrative of Thoreau's first year in the woods, with each season holding its own challenges for survival and the possibilities for inspiration. I just played this game minutes ago, and it is an absolute delight. Tracy, we are so thrilled that you're here.
All right. Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, we usually kick things off with, what is your favorite game to play?
I mean, that's, obviously an impossible question to really answer because... Yeah, I mean, that's like, it's the same as asking, what's your favorite movie, right? What mood are you in? What do you...
Yeah. Do you like music? What's your... Yeah.
Yeah. What's your favorite song? I mean, come on, that's an impossible question to answer. So you kind of have to qualify it by mood, who you're playing it with, all these kinds. So it's so qualified, right? So if I'm playing a game with, maybe with my nieces and nephews, then Super Smash Brothers, right? If I'm playing a game quietly by myself, I think I love, sort of beautiful experiences like Journey or the Stanley Parable, right? If I'm thinking about systems, right? I mean, then I would say something like chess. If I'm thinking about cozy, sort of make me feel good games, then I'm thinking about Animal Crossing, right? And if I'm thinking about social experiences, then I'm watching baseball, right? So I don't know. It's an impossible singular answer. It's a range of moments and emotions and experiences, and I can only answer it in that way.
That is the best answer I've heard.
It's like, maybe some people come up with their favorite game of all time, their obsessive favorite game of all time, right? But it's an honest answer, at least.
Well, I'd love to kind of go back real quick, and I'm just curious, what got you into games? What really is the start of your story?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a crazy thing. So I'm a bit older than, I guess, probably people who are listening to this. So when I was growing up, there were no video games. The first, games that I played were board games. And then they got more and more complicated, interesting, and I got more and more into them, like Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, right? I remember my first experience with digital games was Pong. My parents were very much early adopters, and we stood in line to get that black and white, Sears and Roebuck's Pong game. And I was enthralled by, my dad set it up with, I remember, an A/B switch. So the television would go between watching it. And there was like, 3 or 4 channels, 3 channels plus PBS. And then there was this Pong thing. And so this A/B switch was magic to us, that you could flip it into this mode where we would lay on our stomachs for hours and play it. So it was magical to me. I never really thought, I'm going to be a game designer. I did a lot of things as a kid. We put on plays. I made Super 8 movies. We, built a whole system of, we built a mail system in our neighborhood where we deliver local mail. And we built a telegraph system in our backyard. And we built, we would build things. And one of the things we got was early on, we got a IBM PC Junior, and we started programming. And so we built a game, right? We built tic-tac-toe, but I had seen the movie War Games. So we built around it this idea that it was global thermonuclear war, and that if you lost tic-tac-toe, then it would blow up. So it built a little image of a mushroom. So I think for me, games were part of a spectrum of theater and film and comic books that we were writing and experiences that we were creating. And we had this whole like sort of local group of kids where we were makers, right? And there wasn't, a lot of opportunity back in the 70s when I was growing up there wasn't a lot of other media, right? There was no internet for us to go on. There was, like I say, only 3 channels and PBS. We did go in religiously and watch like Kimba the White Lion and Speed Racer. But there wasn't a lot of distraction, right? So we were making all the time. And I think that's how I became a game designer, is because not because of games, it was because of making. It was because we were constantly making things. And games were eventually, as I grew up, I actually went to film school. And then after film school, got a job at an interactive laserdisc company. Games became the most interesting thing you could make. And that's how I got into this most interesting problem solving, the most interesting sort of experience creation. And that was the path, the sort of meandering path that led me to start to understand games as how I could express myself, how I could, tell the stories that were important to me, and how I could understand the world in a way that was an inclusive experience. It wasn't just images on a screen. It wasn't just words on a page or images on a page. It was this sort of inclusive, holistic experience that I was creating for other people to engage with and build their own experience around. So that's the long answer, I guess, the meandering answer to the meandering path.
This might be a hard left turn, but we really like to research our guests ahead of time. If I've got this right, Tracy, I think in the past you were a co-founder of Spider Dance. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
You had a number of games at Spider Dance, but one of them was, actually all of them appear to like have licensed IP from other parties. As an example, one was NBC's Weakest Link. And I'm just curious how, I think for a lot of independent game developers, there's probably just seems overwhelming to approach an IP holder and try to license their IP for use in your game. How did you think about that with maybe you or your co-founders?
Okay, so first of all, yes. So Stephen Hoffman, Naomi Kukubo, Mike Gresh were the co-founders of Spider Dance with myself, and we began that company based on a massively multiplayer technology that we had built, and we actually built some original IP on it. But at the time, it was really hard to get, 1 million people together on your original IP unless it was like EverQuest or something, right? So we thought, well, we've built this really interesting technology where we can service all these people at once. What's the best way to get so many people in playing all at once. And it seemed to us, because co-watching and playing games was a real phenomenon. Watching television and playing games at the same time was like this real phenomenon. So our idea was, people are watching and playing at the same time. So what if we synchronized those experiences, and we made, watching television this massively social activity, right? So that was the sort of core for people who aren't familiar with Spider Dance. So it was a technology based on a theory of social, like massive social media, right? This is before Facebook and all that. So the idea was we would attract people with the television shows and then put up the URL for the game, and people would go and they'd interact with each other and they'd have this great time. And, sometimes there'd be prizes. And sort of backing off of things like the weakest link for a minute, our very first partner in this was MTV. And what was so interesting is we had built this technology, and then I heard through the grapevine that MTV was making this show with Amit Zappa where they wanted to do exactly the same thing. They wanted to build a television show with virtual contestants, what's called Web Riot. Sorry, it's been a long time, dig it down the brain. It's called Web Riot. And, there was like these 3 on-screen contestants, and then there was millions of other contestants at home who could also win the game, right? And you just have to understand that this was prior to like Zoom and web calls and everything. And so there was this idea that at least one of the people would show up on this fancy webcam, and, it was crazy for the time. This is, back in 1998 when we started building it. So I kept calling the MTV offices. I'm calling and they don't take my call because I'm like nobody. Right. And then I go and I happen to speak on a panel at CES, and the executive in charge of it was in the audience, and he runs up in the line after the talk and he says, "We need to talk." And I take his card. I've been calling his office every day. Right. He's like, "We need to talk." And I look and I'm like, I know. And so, of course, long story short, we did get, the contract to build out the online component to Web Riot. And that was really the way that the company was able to get its legs under it. And then, of course, we were able to secure funding and go on to work with larger partners like Weakest Link, NBC and stuff like that. So it's a funny thing. You're saying, it might be intimidating. Well, it's also just hard to get the call. You don't know when, as an indie developer, when and where the call might come. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a funny story about being ready for the call is call 300 times. And then when they come to you, you're ready.
Be persistent and also a little lucky.
Lucky in the end.
Yeah. That's great.
Well, Tracy, I would love to chat a little bit about the Walden game, Walden, a game. And, I downloaded it myself. I was playing it. It really just reminded me, I kind of had this nostalgic feeling of playing Myst back in the day a little bit. And I'm just kind of curious, like how a game like this comes to be and your role in it. And it's just kind of a fascinating little glimpse as a fan of the book as well. Like I actually felt that this game made me feel much more immersed in the story. And I took away a lot more than probably like in the few minutes that I played the game than like reading the book. Like it just felt like I connected with it much more. Tell me a little bit about the process of creating this game.
Right. So first of all, it was a long, lengthy labor of love because there's no one who's you're going to pitch this game to who's going to say, I'll give you, a bunch of money to make a game about Thoreau. It's just not going to happen. Right. Although ironically, almost 20 years later now, survival games are quite popular. So it's an ironic thing that, back in 2007, when I started making this game, it was actually the most outrageous thing I could, when people say, well, what are you working on at parties? I'm like, well, working about it's a game about Henry David Thoreau. And people were like, why? To me, first and foremost, this is a game about time and how we spend our time in life. And it's not a game about survival. It's a game about how we thrive versus how we survive. So it has, as a kind of MacGuffin, a survival system. For those who aren't familiar, it's a red herring, right? So it's a red herring that this is a game about survival. If you play it as a game about survival, you will not necessarily thrive in the game. And if you only played it for a few minutes, you might not have experienced anything I'm talking about. So I will tell you that it is a slow unfold. And basically, this is a game where you first go out and you survive in the woods, but there are turning points where you start to understand that you are there for other reasons. Thoreau did not go out to the woods to prove that he could live in the woods. He knew he could live in the woods. And by the way, it was only 2 miles from his house. So, he went out to the woods to, as he says, reduce life to its sort of simplest form and see what else there was to discover, right? So we're surviving. But if we put all this effort into surviving and then building a bigger cabin and, get a fancier fishing pole and all this, like tacking up as we do in our survival games, we're going to miss the point. So it's basically a game about a particular kind of exploration, an exploration of the soul. Not, you can explore this whole woods. There's a great, huge woods to explore in the game. But what you wind up finding if you do that exploration is this connection of the human soul to nature. And our woods change subtly day to day in the game. It changes over season to season. There are 8 seasons in our world because Thoreau didn't believe that 4 seasons were enough. So it's a subtle change, a shift in mindset over the course of the game. And there are ancillary stories that are being told, his relationships with his family, with his mentor, with other writers, with social moments like the abolitionist movement. So there's a lot of other stories that he's related to that are being told throughout these 8 seasons, this year that you spend in the woods. So that's all a long way to say that this is an impossible game to pitch for funding. And and back in 2007, it was a ridiculous idea. So we started paper prototyping and then making small digital prototypes and then making bare bones 3D prototypes once we sort of figured out the system, the underlying system and all the elements. And it was about 2013 or 2014, 2012, maybe even 2012, where you started seeing grants come out that were speaking to video games. So like the NEA changed its wording of its media artist grants, which we had gotten a media artist grant for The Night Journey with Bill Viola, but he's an established artist. And, it was one of way back in 2004 or 5, that was one of the first media artist grants that the NEA had ever given to The Night Journey. I think it was 2012, 13, somewhere around there. They rewrote their the verbiage of the call for media artist grants for the National Endowment for the Arts and included video games. And so, of course, my team and I were like, boom, jump on it. And so we applied and got a grant. And, it was tiny. It's $40,000, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And that's tiny. Anyone who makes video games knows that you're not making a, fully immersive 3D world with like 6 hours of content in it for $40,000, even on a small team. But we used it to start, getting more interest. We got selected for the workshop, for Sundance workshop for New Frontiers, and got mentored by a lot of really great other media creators. And we also then applied for and got another grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So that really sort of kickstarted us. We were able to bring some people on, just a couple of people on, like not completely full time, but like enough time so we weren't just doing it in our spare time kind of a thing. So we had a very small team, but we were able to bring some people on and able to really start building out the more media intensive parts of the world, because we had a fair idea of the system by that time, through paper prototyping and just really rough digital prototyping. And so we were bringing people on. It was very incremental sort of experience producing a game of this scope with limited to no resources. And then, just for the TMI part of it, in 2013, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and had to take some time off. And so, all these things just started coming in and sort of saying, don't make this game. and yet I persisted. Right. And eventually we were able to make the game. We were able to talk some pretty great people into participating with us. So Emil Hirsch plays the voice of Thoreau. And we had Michael Sweet, who's an absolutely brilliant composer and audio designer, do our dynamic audio system and composed and then recorded at the Berklee School of Music the score, which I think brings the whole thing alive and really makes it emotional. So we had some amazing people along the way, including our the folks at the NEH and the NEA and Sundance and our other supporters. So that's, I call it the Tom Sawyer method of producing. It's basically you make the fence look so cool to paint that people come and like, I'll give you an apple to paint part of your fence. You're like, bring it on, right? So that's what we did. And we did it for a decade.
That's an incredible story. Thanks for sharing that. Looking back at that process, I'm curious, what would you have done differently? If there's anything that stands out from that?
It's so hard to answer that question because the right answer, the answer I give my students at the end of the process is scope it down, scope it down, scope it down, and scope it down. Those are all the answers, right? However, I'm so happy with the way we were able to articulate Thoreau's world in such a deep, rich way. And had we scoped it down, I feel that it would not have been a full vision of his world. I think, honestly, we did the best job we could of articulating this 200-page book in this 6-hour, long experience. It actually takes about as long to play the game as it does to read the book. And there is about, if you were to go through I would say maybe half to maybe a little bit more of the book is in the game, represented either as a system, as a piece of media, as a piece of text. We are representing the book. I feel we did our duty to the book, right? We did it. And had I scoped it down, had I made a little thing about just, surviving in the woods, which is quite frankly, when I see other people who've done, like people do in Minecraft and stuff like that, that's what they do. They didn't actually translate the philosophy. They just translated, I'm at a pond fishing. We wanted to translate the philosophy, and it's hard to scope down the test of a philosophy, which is what this is. I want to test my philosophy about living simply in life through the seasons of a year, right? How do you test a philosophy if you don't challenge people to have to live it and discover its nuances? If you don't have them go through an emotional arc of that year, he was there for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, but he writes the book as over the course of the year. And then he says at the end of it, and the second year was very much like it. So he takes the course of a year as his bookends. And that's what we did too. And there's an arc in the book. It is not really a story, but it is an arc of how a year goes. And it begins in the easiest, most lovely part of the year, in the summer. And it gets harder and harder. And then, of course, we come to the spring with the rebirth and the recommitment to the theme. And we had to have that arc. And that meant that this game had to, represent this whole year. It had to challenge you to respond as nature changed. So scope, it's the right answer, but it's, in this particular case, it is the wrong answer. Students do as I say, not as I do.
I love that. That's been very guilty of that on scoping things over time. It's such easy advice to give and so hard to follow sometimes. So yeah. Appreciate your transparency there. I'm curious, just, from like a business perspective, obviously it was a journey to get this built. I'm really curious on the pricing strategy. So, I think the world we operate in, a lot of it is free games, or it's 99-cent or $2.99 apps. And then, obviously pretty familiar with, $40 to $60 PC and console games. But I see a $9.99 price, and I'm just wondering, like, what was your journey to choosing that price, and were you happy with that choice?
Okay, so you don't know that this is hilarious, because the very first price for the game was $18.45, which is the year that Thoreau went to the woods. And that was on itch, where they let you price anything. When we went to PlayStation and Xbox, of course, we had to have the 99-cent ending, because they don't allow you to price a game at $18.45, which it had to be $18.99. And we're like, well, then our joke doesn't work, right? So I'm being flippant. We did do research at the time when we first came out. So we first launched in 2017. I think, yeah, that's right. Yes. Sorry, just like brain farts. There's life before COVID and there's life now, and you can't really remember the years before. Yeah. So we did our research about, what a 6-hour, indie game should cost. And most of them were around between the sort of $14.99 and sort of, $19.99. So around, $15 to $20, right? We thought, okay, we'll be $18.45 because it sounded so right to us. So that's what we launched at, $18.45. And that was great for us. And then, of course, we would go on sale and we'd see these bumps. And there's no marketing math behind our strategy. It's literally us going, let's cut the price so more people can have it. So our strategy literally is completely shooting from the hip. We're like, oh, now all those same games are, $9.99. So let's be that. And, it's a few years old. So let's give people a break. And then if it's $9.99, we can go on sale all the time, and it can be $4.99. And so now you'll find us on sale a lot at $4.99. So most people who buy the game will probably get it at $4.99, and also, it just like allows us to be a little bit viable in terms of bringing some money into, just keep supporting. We kept building. So there's the commercial version of the game. And then what you may or may not have noticed is on the website, there's a section for teachers. And we kept building. And so we made web-based versions, what we call modules. There are 5 modules that are free for teachers that take excerpts from the game. And some of them actually extend. So there's like a whole civil disobedience module that is content that is not, there's some of it is in the game, but we took it a lot further, right? So there's modules for teachers that have associated curriculum, which was a whole nother development process we did after we launched the indie game. And so we wanted to have some revenue. So we kept putting it back into this educational version and then just supporting the website for, teachers hitting our website costs us money and we give it away for free. So we just need some money to pay for our website so teachers can continue to use the games. And so that's the entire cycle. The entire theory is what do we need to keep running, keep up, upkeep. We just need a cycle of upkeep, so we can keep casting our spells.
Totally makes sense. Well, you can always say you popularized year-based pricing before Taylor Swift did. So
that's hilarious. Okay.
So, for those that don't know, her recent re-release of her 1989 album was priced $19.89. So
I love it. I love it. We were cutting edge that way.
That's right. And so it sounds like you are still seeing new players purchase copies. That's helping pay for server maintenance and the least.
Yeah, I mean it's actually a pretty evergreen game, to be honest with you. And every time we go on sale, like we didn't launch on all our platforms all at once. That's the other thing. So we launched on itch, then we launched on Steam, then we launched on PlayStation, then we launched on Xbox during COVID. And every time we launch a new platform, it's a whole new set of players. So we actually had a huge response to the Xbox launch during COVID. It was our biggest launch to date, frankly. It was just the right time for a cozy game about living in the woods, right? Because, there was that other cozy game about living in the woods, or living in islands at least. So it was like, it was our biggest launch was Xbox during COVID. So because we've taken, we took so long to launch on each platform, there's like a whole new batch of players there who haven't had the game. And Xbox was our first worldwide, well, I guess you count Steam and itch, but it was our first worldwide console launch. So there's a ton of international players. We get all these letters saying, when will you be porting the game to German? And I'm like, okay, it's me here. It's just me.
How many people have downloaded the game in your estimates?
That's such a great question. I have all the sheets and I've never had time to add it up, but I mean, millions have downloaded because we were part of those free packs, so the answer is millions. I just don't know how, In fact, that's one of the reasons I freaked out recently when there was that whole thing about Unity and back paying and for units, possibly having to back pay for units download. I was like, no, but they backpedaled it, so it's all okay now. I gave them away to teachers and everyone for free. So yeah, we made the game completely free to teachers and parents educating at home during COVID. That was the commercial game we gave away for free. Then during that time, we were making the modules. So now they're free. And we still offer a discount to classrooms for the indie game. But now we just basically say, here's the modules for you if you're teaching with it. And that's easier. It's usually easier in a classroom to not have to download and install anything. But yeah, millions of players, honestly. And we get letters. I swear to God, the range of letters are hilarious. Everything from, really older players who are like, I have never played a game since Myst, to bring back to your earlier reference. And I've never been interested in playing a game. And this game was so interesting to me. And I now come home every night and look forward to chasing rabbits through the forest and, just basically living my life in the woods. And that's so beautiful. I've gotten letters from people. It's their first first person game that they've ever played. It's so interesting to teach people how to be in an immersive first person experience. We think, of course, as gamers that it's completely natural, but it's absurd to think that it's completely natural to be moving one's feet with 4 keys and moving one's head around with a mouse, right? That is not natural. It is not. And when you're walking around the world, you don't think like this as you walk, right? I'm doing this, but, of course, in 3D worlds, one can move one's head all the way around when walking forwards and backwards. And then you have to break that down and teach it to people who've never done it before. And it's just fascinating. By the way, this is a part of the journey with Night Journey as well, is teaching folks at art galleries who may or may not have ever played a first-person experience how to navigate in a world. And in that case, in the Night Journey, it's a very surreal world with very few visual landmarks. So that one was crazy to have to teach new players how to navigate a 3D immersive experience, right? So we get letters all the way from, this is the first game I've played since Myst and I love it and I just reach out and tell you how much I love it, to I love I love the letters from students, younger people who are like, we read this book in class and I hated it, but then we played the game and now I get it, right? And that speaks to me, right? Because I think this book is about the same things we're wrestling with today. He was writing at a time when the speed of life was increasing due to technologies that were taking over, right? So they were dealing with the telegraph, which is like the internet of its time, right? They call it the Victorian internet, right? They were dealing with the telegraph and the train, right? And sort of cables across the ocean being able to tell you what was happening in Europe, right? And to those people, the speed of information was accelerating so fast. And it's the same way we feel today, that with, social media, it's just everyone knows everything all at once. Boom, right? Our pods of learning are intersecting from all around the world, and we are influencing each other and changing and learning and growing as a species so much faster, right? Well, that's what he's writing about. And he's writing about, if I slowed it down for a minute, what could I learn? What is essential in this world where things are speeding up so quickly, right? And I think that's really important for us to think about. And a lot of people, there's like the slow movement, right? So we have slow games, we have slow music, we have slow architecture, we have slow food, right? I mean, people wanting to understand, what does it mean to slow our lives down a bit? Where are the essentials, right? How do we judge? How do we value the essentials? One way to do that is to just strip away the things that are complicating our lives and begin to understand a little bit better what we really need versus what we think we need. So to me, when kids are reading this book in classrooms, they're sort of put off by his, archaic, long sentences. He has like paragraphs that are sentences. And it's weird because he has paragraphs that are sentences, but he's also one of the most pithy quoted, guys out there, right? So here he is saying simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. And then he's got a paragraph of a sentence, and kids are put off by that. But then this game allows them to simply drop into his world and feel it slow down.
It's different when you're playing the game and having it almost read to you at the same time, like around. So that's really unique. I want to switch gears a little bit. So you had mentioned a Night Journey, getting people who are art goers or museum lovers like introduced to a game like that. What was the impetus for that game, and the challenges there? So
first of all, that game, a game that I made with the artist Viola, and that was create the idea for that game was created by Bill. And he got this media arts grant, and he went around and talked to a lot of game designers to try to find a group to collaborate with. Right. He originally collaborated with a group at Intel, and they kind of wrote a spec for what when I got the spec, it was like, I thought was like, mixed with like Buddhism, right? And when I had a meeting with Bill, I brought some games. I brought I think I brought Eco, as I recall, and I can't remember what else I brought, but I brought my PlayStation, and I wanted to show him. I was so passionate. I wanted to show him that games could be this beautiful art form, and that we didn't need to just have it be sort of puzzles, visual puzzles. That the experience of the game itself could be expressive. The system could be expressive, right? And we had this conversation, and I'm like playing Eco very passionately, When I look back on it now, I just kind of laugh at myself, But at the end of the conversation, I'll always remember, and he's a really beautiful thinker. And Bill came up to me, and he grabbed my shoulders, and he said, "I love the way you think." And look at that. I don't know if this is visual, but sparklers just went off behind me. And that's how I felt when Bill said that to me. He got it. Like, he got through my naive sort of young passion. He got what I was trying to say. And he related it to his experiences as a young artist working in video, when video was snotted upon by the sort of traditional art institution. And the idea of showing video art in a museum was ridiculous. He told me at one point they used to put the video art back by the bathrooms. And so for him, what he saw was a young artist. I'm getting emotional because, when you're seen, you feel that way, right? A young artist trying to express themselves in a field that is not respected, right? So we worked together for a long time, actually. It's just like I say, when you're seen, it's very emotional. And working with Bill, so this is before Walden. I had actually had the idea to make Walden before this, back in 2002, when I was traveling. I had written in my journal, I'd been visiting the pond, and I said, I want to make a game about this experience, but I don't know how. I had written that line in my journal. And then, I met Bill in 2005, and then we started working on the Night Journey, and then also was, teaching Genova Chen and working with him on his games, and working on Cloud and Flow. And so all of those experiences, by the way, are what built up my confidence to then go try to do Walden, right? But going back to the experience with Bill, it was so interesting because as a game designer, we often start with our goals. We say, we would like the game to be this, right? And that's what I would try to have those conversations with him. And he would always sort of gently steer the conversation off to these beautiful philosophical discussions and stories and expressions of, and I realized that he was teaching me about his process. I was trying to teach him about my process, which I did, but he was teaching me about his process as an artist. And the design of the game was this sort of meandering experience where we would make a paper prototype and then come and have a philosophical discussion. And then we would make a digital prototype and then we'd come and have a philosophical, and then we would come back and forth between the two processes, right? And then the day that what I would call found it, I was sitting, I remember just sitting in my office, and we had been trying to make this sort of explorable video moments. And the mistake we were making, I'll call it, is A equals A. It was very logical that the video would be the thing that you were looking at in the 3D world. And I made a mistake. I typed the wrong thing. And instead of a tree and a tree, these birds came out of a tree. And my heart stopped. And I realized it's not A equals A. It's not logic. That poetry is about collision of ideas. And so this was visual poetry, these birds coming out of this tree. And then I went wild. And we started making all these combinations of things, right? And when Bill came the next time, he hugged me again. And he said, we got it, And this was after, a long time of discussions, And then we went and we started building out the world. We had this huge map of the world and all the ideas that he'd put in on poets that he'd given us to read. And we started making these moments of these collisions between these two worlds, this 3D world that you're walking through, which is a kind of representation of sort of the edge of night in our lives. And then these video worlds, these reflections, which are the memories and the kind of the visions and the sort of spiritual world seeping through the quote unquote real world of our lives. And once we had the mechanic, then we could build the stanzas of the poem, right, if you will.
So we've talked a lot about, games you've individually authored, but you've also got a rich history with, mentoring students through, being a professor and more importantly, the founding director of the USC Games program. What are some of your learnings from mentoring students along their journey?
So I was the founding director of of USC Games, which is a cross-disciplinary sort of meta program across a number of schools at USC. But I recently, several years ago, passed that on to Danny Bilson. And so I'm director emeritus of USC Games. And I very gratefully have passed it on to Danny, who's done a fabulous job with the program. I am focused on the Game Innovation Lab, but also, as you're pointing out, kind of more focused on mentoring. I recently sort of took on the core undergraduate game design class, which is called Game Design Workshop. It's based on they're together. They came about together, Game Design Workshop. So I recently retook over that class after a number of years teaching other classes, and kind of becoming reinvested in teaching new young designers the bare bones craft of game design and how to really put yourself into the mindset of designing rather than the mindset of being a player, which I think are both extraordinarily valuable, by the way. And I think that becoming a better player, which we could talk about if we had a lot of time, is also a real passion of mine. I actually am just completing a book with Matt Farber about how we play games. It's called The Well-Read Game. And it'll be coming out next year from MIT Press. But that's a real passion. How we become better players. But in my class, it's really a focus on how we begin to learn to think like a designer and become a designer, both individually, but also importantly within teams, how we value the contribution of others and work well with others on this really wonderful, complex process it is that designing an experience for others, designing the potential for others to become playful is so beautiful. It's so rich. I think, the best designers are very generous people. And so it's almost like teaching generosity to young people who are coming to college. They're usually freshmen and sophomores come into this class, and teaching them about that sense of generosity is really fun for me. It's really great. I love it. So I'm reinvesting in that process of early designers.
And earlier you mentioned, seemed like your number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5 rule for students was scope it down. If you had to pick a number 6, what would it be?
Yeah. It's not as easy to state. Scope is so easy to state, but the number 6 after scope. I'm trying to come up with the way to word it, but it's focus on the experience, right? And many young designers have a passion for a particular game or type of game, and they want to remake that game, but with, right? They want to add a feature or change features. And they're very, very focused on kind of recreating the experience that they had, but they're doing it by looking at, the paint job. And my point is, look at the experience. Look at what happened in your mind, in your heart, what unfolded to make you love it so much, right? What twists and turns and moments of epiphany unfolded to make you love that experience so much. And if you can articulate that, then you don't need to focus on someone else's paint job, right? You can get down to the bones of the game. You can get down to what were the rules, what were the sort of elements that led you to have those epiphanies, that led you to have that experience. And once you can start to articulate your experience, then you can start to deconstruct those bones, right? And that's what I'm trying to teach them. I'm trying to teach them that it is all about the experience. That understanding your own experience will lead you to understand better how systems create experiences.
Such a universal truth, too.
So
Whitney Cummings is a comedian who was asked, can you learn how to be funny? And she said, hell yeah. You just have to look at the world with curiosity and just ask yourself what's funny about this, or acknowledge the silliness, right? It's the same with design and a lot of things. I love that. The games that you've worked on are very meaty projects, years long. In the case of Walden, it was 10 years, I believe. People interested in creating games probably have a lot of ideas. How would you help them kind of say no to certain things? Like what are the things that they should watch out for? That is it again kind of getting back to this curiosity and what drives you and what's your experience, and how does someone choose what to work on?
Wow, how to say no. That's such an interesting problem for all of us, right? First and foremost, I don't know that you should say no. So especially when you're young, I feel like you should say yes a lot. I had some of my best experiences by saying yes to things that I was hesitant about. I, for example, said yes to a game show. I was never a fan of game shows. I said yes to a game show and wound up making one of the projects I'm most proud of in my career, called Netwits, which was a really early multiplayer, online multiplayer casual game. Like, really early. There were 5 people on the internet, so we made a game for them. And I love it. I love its style. I love the team. There are still, every once in a while I run across some of the prizes that we gave away on eBay, because we gave away like a party. It was set in the 1950s, so we gave like party lampshades away, because you were the life of the party, so you wore it home. It just was a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. And if I had been in my snotty art student mode, I would have said, like, I don't want to make a game show, right? And I never would have had that experience. So from that, I actually learned, say yes, right, to things that maybe, and then once you say yes, throw yourself into it 150%, like 300%, throw yourself, your whole commitment and every piece of yourself into it and make it full of you. Right. So that's what I say to young people, saying yes a lot. And then as you get older, I think you start to realize you have less time. That's when it's important to start saying no, because you have all these opportunities. And I don't know about you, but I'm a person who everything sounds good. I'm like, ooh, that's such a good idea. I want to work on it. Ooh, it's so cool. So I get, overwhelmed because I say yes to too many things. And that's when you have to decide what's your heart's. There's cool. Ooh, I think it's so cool. And then what's your heart project? What's the project that you need to make? And like, for example, Walden was a project I needed to make. At the time that I said yes to Walden, I also was saying yes to a whole bunch of other projects on my you see on my website that I did, which were great, but they weren't my heart project. And I probably should have said no to some of them because I really burned myself out by trying to do a bunch of projects all at once, right? And so that's a lesson that you learn as you get older, which is do the thing that when your time is limited, you don't want to say you didn't do it, right? If somebody said, okay, you've got until tomorrow to make games, what are the games that you wish, you really want to have had made? Do those. Don't just do the one, oh, that's so super cool. It's so funny that it does that. We can make a trick of software and it's funny, right? I mean, that could be fun too. I'm not dissing like super fun tricks of software because some of them are really great. But for you as a designer, as an artist, you have to live with that, what you spend your time with. For me, I had to make a cutoff on, and I'd made enough game shows. Like all of a sudden I made one game show and I threw my heart into it. And then everybody wanted me to make game shows. So I made Netwits, and then the folks at Columbia TriStar asked me to make Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. And I was like, okay. And then we started a company and wound up making Web Riot and game shows basically. And I was like, okay, time is, we're done with this. I really want to go back to my roots. And that's when I, started the Game Innovation Lab and really started focusing on things that games I really felt like with the time I had, I have to make these games.
So Tracy, you're the author of Game Design Workshop, a play-centric approach to creating innovative games. And there was just the 20th anniversary release of this. That's got to be exciting for you. What are some of the takeaways from that?
Yeah. So Game Design Workshop, was first released in 2004, which, is an eternity ago in terms of game design. And this year, we have just released the 20th anniversary, 5th edition of the book, which is a core textbook for many introductory game design classes. And for this version, what I really wanted to do was dig into some of the things that I see are difficult for young designers. So similar to what I was talking about before, this idea of the experience goals, and specifically the emotional experience goals. I have found over the years that it is difficult for young people to articulate emotional experience goals. So, by that I mean, rather than saying it will be an immersive world, right? That's it's a goal, but it's a kind of a technical goal in a way. Rather than saying that, you might say, for example, players will feel that they are part of an evolving culture, that their choices change the culture of the world. Now, this is an artistic goal. We have to figure out, what does that mean, right? Another example is like player-generated content, right? So you could say, my pillar is that there will be player-generated content. Okay, great. check it off the box technical. The folks in technology come to me and they say, we've made it possible for people to upload their pictures, whatever, of penises, probably. No. But, what if we articulated that differently? What if we said players would feel appreciated for their contributions to the game world? Right now, that basically implies that there's player-generated content, right? We're going to contribute, but that there's a sort of a systemic element to how we appreciate that content, right? And I think it's important to articulate our goals in that way, because otherwise they just become checkboxes for us to kind of say, click, we did it, right? But if we say, I'm going to feel a sense of wonder around every corner of the world, that's different than saying there's going to be a lot of cool stuff in the world to find. And so one of the things I've done in the book is really, dive into this idea of setting emotional experience goals and testing. How do you test against those emotional experience goals? So I really sort of blew out that section a lot. I also got contributors who I think are particularly good at this. So I have, like, for example, a whole article by Bruce Straley that's new about designing the emotional experience goals of The Last of Us, right? And how that game was designed to meet a particular moment, right? I'm not, for the two people who haven't either seen it or played it, I'm not going to say it, but we all know what it is, right? There's this moment where everything changes in the game. And the entire game was designed so that you feel a certain way until that moment happens. And when that moment happens, you feel completely differently. And you wouldn't feel completely differently if the entire game hadn't been mindfully designed to make you feel one way so that the twist creates that particular moment. And so that's what I mean when I say, designing for emotional goals, right? So I've included examples in the book and also a host of new, more diverse design voices. I always take some of the older interviews. I have a lot of interviews with designers. I put them on the website, make those available for everybody. And then I bring in new voices. And so I brought in a lot of new voices, and I'm really pleased with that. And so the book is, is out, and I really hope that classes who use the book will upgrade to it, because I feel like it does a better job of articulating this core idea of setting emotional experience goals and designing your game flow to meet it.
Well, that's great. Encourage people to go check out the 20th anniversary edition of Tracy's book, Game Design Workshop. If people want to find you online, are you okay with that? And where should they look?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I get a lot of stuff, and so if I don't respond, first of all, I'm on sabbatical right now, so I don't want to respond to anything.
Smart.
So I'm just sailing and scuba diving and otherwise unreachable. But yeah, I mean, I'm at Kino Jabber pretty much on most platforms, and my website is just tracyfullerton.com, and there's links on there to reach me.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for being here, Tracy.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure talking, and I look forward to having another conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And enjoy your sabbatical.
I am. I'm going sailing in just a couple hours now.
All right.
Thanks, Tracy.